This is our February 9th, 2016 update on elections and vote fraud. It's entitled Election Night Gatekeepers and the Trump Presidency. It's being recorded about 3:15 Eastern Standard Time on the day of the New Hampshire primary, so they're still voting in New Hampshire. I wanted to get this out before the results came in so that you could compare our kind of predictions versus what actually happens. Our last YouTube video, audio video, has gotten about 7,000 hits since Thursday, which would be Thursday afternoon to now is about 5 days. So that's pretty good. It's not like some of these music videos that get 10 million hits, but a lot of thoughtful people have listened to it and passed it around. Now, before we get into the election night gatekeepers, I wanted to talk about this election, of course, which we have. So we have Trump. Here's the things going in his favor that make the commentary of the networks highly suspicious as we move towards these key elections. One, Trump has the excitement. He's the most entertaining, which helps in the television age. He's a celebrity. By far, Pat Buchanan was somewhat of a celebrity when he moved from Crossfire to running for office president in 1996. But he really doesn't have 1,000th the celebrity Pat didn't as Trump does. So he also, but what they're saying, and the crowds are unbelievable. They're not showing Trump's crowds on the media. If you go on his Twitter account, they have pictures of some of these massive seas of humanity that show up for him versus the 20 to 200 people that show up for Kasich or Christie or Jeb Bush. I mean, this has got to mean something, but the media acts like this means nothing. They've talked about the electorate being like on a summer drunk or a summer fling, and as soon as they came to their senses, they would start voting for people like Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton over Sanders. This is fantasy, and they can only talk this way because at least the people running the 5 TV networks know that they have the computers fixed, and they feed the reporters all kinds of information to get them to say what they want. So while Trump's been ahead in the polls by all different kind of polls by 20, 30 points in much of New Hampshire, at least by 15 in the ones that have it the closest, they're still acting like, well, Trump is about to collapse and Jeb Bush and Kasich and Rubio are about to surge. And so the commentary for the last 5 days, until the Saturday night debate, the 5 days before that, was more pro-Rubio than I've ever seen for any other candidate. As we said, and it's very important to repeat, John Berman, the CNN anchor, said on CNN 10 days ago, about February 1 or whenever it was, whatever the Saturday was, he said that not only, when somebody said the GOP wants the narrative to be Rubio surging out of Iowa, he said, yeah, and the media also wants that narrative, which was maybe talking out of turn as far as his bosses would want. But then also, we've been communicated to by people I trust. I didn't hear it, but Lou Dobbs said, we're being told that we should all say that Rubio is surging. So Lou Dobbs, who has a history of more than any other reporter or anchor exposing the vulnerabilities of our voting system, blew the whistle also there. But the narrative is tonight going into this thing, Trump has the most to lose, and Rubio may still be surging, and Kasich, God help us, Kasich is the most bought off, he's tied at least for the most bought off politician in the country. People like him and John Boehner. John Boehner's went to Muller High School. I went to St. X in the same city, Cincinnati. These guys are made to be worth 10 or 20 million bucks by the time they leave Congress because they are slaves. They are disgusting puppets for the powers that be behind the two parties, namely the international banks such as the Fed and Goldman Sachs, which that's now becoming a publicly known fact that the Goldman Sachs and Wall Street fund all these candidates, whether Republican or Democrat. Kasich, them trying to say that he's catching on, reminds me of the great motivational speaker Art Williams, who founded A.L. Williams, which became Primerica. He would sometimes say, when he got to an especially disgusting fact, throw up. And when they're trying to say Kasich is surging, throw up. But they want a puppet. The big media bosses are communicating, giving, if necessary, fake information to their reporters so that on screen they're constantly trying to hype one of these disgusting puppets of the establishment. And that's what they're doing now. So Rubio got beat up by Chris Christie in the debate. It may be that Chris Christie just beat him up so bad that Rubio is now, they can't push him now as the guy that's going to be crowned by everybody. So now they're saying open convention. Bill Kristol, Charles Krauthammer, two guys that are tied into the highest levels of skullduggery and are in the know, are Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard and Charles Krauthammer of Fox News. They pretend to be conservatives, but if you listen to what they say, they are tied in to what is happening. Both of them have now moved to saying, well, we may have a brokered convention. I want to say that over the last few months, Bill Kristol, with his disgusting, arrogant face, has come on many shows and arrogantly looked into the camera with a little bit of hatred for Donald Trump mixed in and said, Trump will not be the Republican nominee. Trump will not, over and over again, Trump will not be the Republican nominee. He says that with arrogance, and he knows, because he knows that his crowd has the voting machines fixed, the crowd behind the Republican and Democratic National Committee. And if people can't handle that there's forces, that the financial forces are behind these two parties, then you got to grow up. You've got to grow up right now. And I will be getting into that because that's the motive. The motive for money and power is the motive behind the people who go to lengths to fix the election system, which is way beyond the imagination of the average person, because the average person is decent. They don't sit around, especially if they get rich, they don't sit around figuring out how they can dominate and manipulate other people. But that's what this crowd behind Goldman Sachs, the Fed, and International Monetary Fund, all these international banks, that's what they do. And follow the money. They're the ones that got the money to erect the computer systems and that are counting our elections and to buy off all the media and all the big radio stations, and that's what they've done at this point. And they all got to be thrown out. They're warping our destiny. They got to be thrown out. So let's go for a second. Let's talk about New Hampshire for a second now. New Hampshire, you have about 130, I think it is, hand-counted precincts, and I hope we're trying to get as many people to watch those as we can. I hope the campaigns are sending people to watch those hand-counted precincts at closing time. Then you know what those results are for real, but only if you're there at closing time, because there's a history of the state Republican Party fixing even those if they can. I remember in 2000, I believe it was 2008, might have been 2012, they gave Ron Paul no votes in a whole section of these hand-counted things. And one family came forth and said, wait a minute, we had 9 people that voted for Ron Paul. So they had to, in retrospect, because those people came forth, add in 9 votes for Ron Paul. Well, who knows how many others they dropped for Ron Paul. This was in the hand-counted area. So you got to have witnesses at closing time. You got to demand what your right is to be up close at the table watching the count. And if the campaigns aren't doing this, it is just suicide, especially the Trump campaign. Excuse me. So then let's talk about, and then in the other 260 or so polling places in New Hampshire, it's computer counted. The votes are taken away from the people. Anyone that tries to see the votes will be arrested tonight in New Hampshire if anyone would try to. There's no provision for the people to count it, and they just announced the results. So we got to compare, if we can, the hand-counted precincts against the computer counted, but they just announced the result, and there's no way to get any ballots tonight. It would take 21 days to get in any ballots. Plenty of time to switch the ballots if you're stealing the city, the state, the county, and the world, and the country and the world. Let me just jump back a minute to Iowa. We saw a very honest count in Iowa in 1996, where the chairman was Rod Bloom. He was a Republican Party chairman, did a totally honest count. But we're getting reports now in from Iowa, 2016, that they were at several places we have reports from. The guy leading the caucus said, well, I'm going to go in the back room and count the votes. Well, where we had an eyewitness, one of the places, they just got up and followed him back. The 2 ladies just got up and followed him back. But this attempt to count the votes in secret away from the people, even though it was, they didn't demand it, but they tried it, very suspicious. And in many of the places, they had such overflow, they had people passing their Post-it note ballots down the row like grade schoolers. that is not the best. Believe me, they should have been getting up and putting their votes into an empty box, and each one person filing by and putting their little vote in, not passing them down the row to where whole batches could be dropped or switched or whatever. We're not saying that happened, but what we're saying is that this is suspicious. They only need Karl Rove himself, who's an establishment guy, someone I don't really trust completely, but he said that it would have only taken 3 or 4 votes at each of the 1,650 caucuses in the Republican side to switch the winner from Cruz to Trump. And then you had the Ben Carson thing. I'm just saying, I'm convinced now that the Trump campaign didn't even think of this. They did nothing to protect him. He may not have thought of it yet, but there was nothing being done effectively in all those 1,600 places to watch the vote, and we would have needed the cooperation of a campaign to get anywhere near that, because people are listening to their campaign. They're not listening necessarily to any external group, which reminds me, which we'll repeat at the end, please, everyone who wants to help us be able to watch these things more thoroughly in the future, go to watchthevote2016.com. That's watchthevote2016.com, and sign up as an associate or as a friend of Watch the Vote 2016, which is also watchthevoteusa.com, and then we can work together. We do send out emails, but we will not overwhelm you with emails. There might be 1 a week. This time of year, there might be 2 a week. Or 1 a month, but we will not overwhelm you with emails, but it gives us a chance to keep in touch, have conference calls, etc. So finishing up on New Hampshire tonight, the New Hampshire Primer is tonight. It's now about 3:37 Eastern Standard Time. They're going to vote till about 7, I believe, p.m., and then they're going to run the counts through the computers and have the hand counts. But I think what they're going to say tonight, they can't believably make it so Trump loses. We've said all along it looks like they might let Trump win in New Hampshire. They have to make it believable, and right now I don't know how they would believably say Trump lost. But they're probably going to say, oh, he only won by 7%, when he probably really won by 20%. And they're going to say, oh, because remember, 80% of the votes are counted by computer, even though 10 counties are counted by hand and 10 by computer. All the big cities are counted by computer, only the small towns are counted by hand. And then they're going to say Kasich or somebody, or Jeb Bush, or who knows who, Rubio is surging, and then that lays the groundwork if they'll probably come out with massive attacks on Trump, and that lays the groundwork for them to defeat Trump in New Hampshire by somebody, and then their pick will be on Super Tuesday. Unless they think they can't make it believable, then they'll go for this one winning here by secret computer count, this one winning there, and then they'll have a brokered convention. Once Trump goes into that brokered convention, he's in their territory. They are criminals. On the Republican National Committee and the Democratic Committee are criminals. They ran the last 2 conventions like criminals. The delegates are supposed to control the convention. Last time in 2012, the Republican one, people spent thousands and thousands of dollars and thousands of hours to get there, and they were treated like window dressing with no power. And Boehner and Reince Priebus and the other people would announce what they wanted from the podium, turn off microphones, pass it, the ayes have it even if they didn't have it, and they would, that's how they ran it. The delegates had no power, and the people on stage are supposed to be refereeing and let the delegates introduce the motions or counter motions or approve what they do. But that is the way it should be, but they ran it like criminal operations. I said before, the Reince Priebus and Debbie Blabbermouth Schultz, as Rush Limbaugh calls her, the head of the Democrat and Republican Committee and the Republican and Democratic National Committee, are much more dangerous than a poor black guy or poor white guy that does an armed robbery at a 7-Eleven tonight. Now, I'm totally against armed robbery. I'm from anybody that does an armed robbery being prosecuted and jailed to the full extent of the law. All I'm saying is that type of person is not one millionth as dangerous to the United States as the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee and the other corporations. And I'm not against all corporations. Many corporations are great and have brought us prosperity. But these are 12 criminal corporations that we're about to expose that that constitute the election night gatekeepers. So now I'm going to begin the presentation that is a compilation of my knowledge accumulated since 1979. That is 36 years ago, or is it 37? I guess we're moving into 37. And I hope to save you the time. All of you who are interested, I hope to save you those 35 years if you're just learning about this subject, so you can get up to speed and work with us or your fellow people and organizations I'm going to tell you about to fix this situation and restore honest voting so we can reclaim the destiny of our company. Election night gatekeepers, which now, it used to be 13 groups 2 years ago, but now it's 12 groups who control election night announcements. And we're going to get into, in this presentation of election night gatekeepers, we're going to talk about the motive of why these people go to such lengths to steal the election so they can control the destiny of the country and block any candidate that might do something for the people of the United States. What I'm about to describe to you is essentially what happens on the November election night across the USA since at least as far back as 1988. At least as far back as 1988, when Bush Sr. was elected, this system to steal elections was perfected. I personally believe that Bush Sr. probably did beat Dukakis. I think it's a virtual certainty he did. All I'm saying is the system was set up then to steal presidential, senatorial, and congressional elections. The computer system began to be imposed upon the United States in 1973. Okay, and then it took 15 years for them to basically get these systems into 3,132 of the 3,142 counties in the United States. There's 50 states, like Ohio has 88 counties. Iowa has 99 counties, okay? So there's 3,142 counties in the United States. The November election and all primaries in the primary season, 3,132, all but 10 of those counties, all the 10 in New Hampshire, have some kind of a computer election system put in, easily rigged, and secret counts. Now, there used to be four major, we might call this Section 1, the mega companies that count the votes on easily rigged secret computer election programs. There used to be four until 2013. Those four were, well, we'll get to that in just a second. Now there's only three because one company bought two of the companies. They're always playing musical chairs, I guess, in case anybody gets onto this and there's legal lawsuits. They're always same people, same money, same people running it, but the corporations will play musical chairs. One of the traits of these election gatekeepers, as I'm saying, is that they periodically change names and or buy each other. But the players and background forces remain essentially the same. These surface changes of ownership and change of name seems to be designed to give the impression that the gatekeepers are diverse as opposed to comprising a basically monolithic force, and perhaps to try and keep ahead of the investigations and criminal indictments that should have come long ago. For most of the last 2 decades, four mega companies counted around 96% of the USA vote on November election nights. These companies were ES&S, Election Systems and Software. Note that company, ES&S. Hart Civic, we use Hart Civic in Cincinnati in the year of 2016. Diebold and Sequoia. Veteran reporter Ronnie Duggar covered this reality in his 2004 article in The Nation magazine entitled, quote, How They Could Steal the Election This Time. This is a very rare and excellent article published by The Nation, and you can find that down the right-hand column of votefraud.org, which is our original website, votefraud.org. You can read that article by going down there. It's linked there, along with everything in the right-hand column are excellent articles that you can read, even though that website, at least as of this minute, is done on software that was 10-year-old, but the quality of articles is there. So circa 2013, a company called Dominion bought Diebold and Sequoia. So that's why we have 13 in our text. This information I'm telling you is at openlettertodonaldtrump.com at the menu tab election night gatekeepers. And we have throughout that article 13 corporations, mega corporations crossed out, because now there's only 12 election night gatekeepers. And the reason for that, again, is that Dominion bought Diebold and Sequoia, probably because Diebold's name got too stinky when in 2004 one of the owners of Diebold came out and said, basically, we're going to make sure W. Bush wins the election. One of these three companies, ES&S, that's Election Systems and Software, headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, counts 60% of the U.S. vote on November election nights. That's worth repeating. One of these three mega companies, Election Systems and Software, ES&S, headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, counts 60% of the U.S. vote on November election nights. Very mysterious companies. The intrepid reporter, a real reporter, not a fake like Geraldo Rivera, a real reporter, Christopher Boleyn, with the American Free Press back when, went into the headquarters at Election System and Software in Omaha, Nebraska, tried to interview him, and of course he couldn't get anywhere, and they treated him like he was some kind of a criminal trying to break into the inner sanctum, you know. And again, about the musical chairs played by these super powerful mega corporations, which never change their stripes, their secrecy, or their mode of operation, but they do change their names. I want to give an example. In the 1970s and 80s, there was a company called CES, Computer Election Services, which was based in California. And then that company morphed in the late 80s and 90s, and I believe that was the time period, into BRC, Business Records Corporation, based in Texas. And then they morphed into the current ES&S as the new century began, or maybe in the mid-90s. So same people, same company, same everything, different names, different states, different corporations. Another example of musical chairs involving, and then another example we're going to get into shortly is the musical chairs between a corporation you've probably never heard of, National Election Pool, which used to be Voter News Service. But we'll get into that musical chairs in the next section. So the first three major gatekeepers on election night, any primary, and all the entire the entire November election night every 4 years, with the exception of those 10 counties in New Hampshire, are the three mega corporations which, quote, count or process the votes for 99% of the 3,142 counties in the USA. And those first three gatekeepers are Election Systems and Software, ES&S, 2, Hart Civic, and 3, now Dominion, which absorbed recently Diebold and Sequoia. Please note, these megacorporations did not break into the system. These companies are hired by each county. There are, as I said, 3,142 counties in the USA. 99% of these counties make the decision consciously to hire one of these three companies. For instance, Hamilton County, Cincinnati, Ohio, as I said, uses Hart Civic. Butler County, a little bit north of me, in Ohio, which was the largest county in former Speaker of the House John Boehner's congressional district, they hired ES&S. And as I understand it, all of South Carolina, in the South Carolina primary coming up, for instance, on February 20th, 2016, this goes back to at least 2008, they hire Election Systems and Software, ES&S, and the system they use from ES&S has no paper ballots. There's no ballots. It's just bleeps of energy. It's like we're living in the Twilight Zone. So why do 3,142 counties out of 3,132 counties out of the 3,142 counties hire these companies? Well, one reason, which gets into the motive, which we'll get into, is that these are backed by billions and billions of dollars, and they come into these counties and say, look, we'll do everything for you. It's easy, blah, 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 blah. And the sin of the local county people, the local county board of elections people, is they step aside, hand the process over to these companies, and they totally abdicate their responsibility to make sure we have open, transparent election systems. It's really criminal activity that all these local boards of elections are involved in, and they sign results that they don't know if they're true or false. We'll get into a little bit more of that, how absurd it is when a little further in. So that brings us to Section 2. We've covered 3 of the mega companies that are the gatekeepers on election night. Section 2 deals with why do all these counties hire so few companies to process our election? And there's other smaller companies in some of these counties. So again, I'm just trying to give a good overview. We had a company, when Diebold got such a stinky name after their executive said we're going to make sure Bush gets elected, a pop-up company called Triad popped up in Ohio and maybe a few other places. We always felt they were taking over and were a front for Diebold, but taking over some of their counties. So there's pop-up companies, but I believe you'll find they all are tied into these three if somebody can dig into it. And all these three, let me just say it before we get any further, these three big companies are tied into the dark side of the intelligence agencies such as the CIA. There's good parts of the CIA, bad parts. There's good parts of every organization that's big today, but there's also bad parts. And you'll find that if people dig deep enough, these are basically the same company behind these three names. Kind of like if you buy Tide or Cheer, Procter & Gamble is getting the sale. So whether you're using ES&S or Dominion or Hart, I would charge that these are three fronts for the intelligence agencies, because those who are behind these international banks like Goldman Sachs running the world, they're not about to have someone get into the presidency especially, or even too many senators or too many congressmen who are going to oppose them. So the next two corporations, you might say, are entities that are the election night gatekeepers, are the Republican National Committee, the RNC, and the Democratic National Committee, the DNC. The RNC and the DNC are obviously controlled by the same background financial forces which own the other three election processing companies. That's pretty much come out in the open now. Actually, Bernie Sanders, I'm not a socialist. I'm against socialism. But Sanders has done a good job in calling out these the Wall Street financial entities behind Hillary Clinton and a lot of the other candidates, and the RNC and the DNC. So they both recommend to their 50 secretaries of states in all 50 states to approve these three mega companies for vote processing. The decision of how to vote is at the county level still. The secretaries of state will authorize what companies the counties are allowed to pick, but the decision is still at the county level. So if we, for instance, use the precinct system, which is another presentation, to change the leaders of the Democratic and Republican Party in most of these 3,100 plus counties, we could immediately within a year restore honest voting, or maybe within a week restore honest voting to every county where it's counted by the people at the neighborhood precinct. We'll get into that near the end, the solution. So the counties in each state then are strongly encouraged to hire these three companies to contract with them to process the county elections. The county boards of elections are told that any of these three companies will process the elections professionally and virtually trouble-free for the election officials. The local board of election officials in each county then step aside. This is the sin of the local counties. They step aside and hand everything essential over to one of these three companies, including if there's a recount. After the November election night, they sign results when they have no idea if the results are true or false. Now, incredibly, all the counties that contract with these three mega companies sign a contract with these three companies that the election officials are public officials, and the elected officials in each county, which either are these election officials or appoint these election officials, are not allowed to look at the source code of the election software that tells the computers what to do on election night. They're not allowed to look at the software. I'll tell you two quick anecdotes, both of which are powerful. Around 1996-2000, the day after the election, I don't remember which year it was exactly, but the day after the election, on our morning talk show then, which was Jerry and Craig, it was like a liberal and conservative, and they were both honest guys, honest brokers, I felt. They always said what they believed. I didn't agree with them a lot of the time on various things, but they were honest brokers. They had on the day after the election that year the head of the Democrat and Republican Party. And I'm not going to even say the names in this case because I know both of them. They're both, I think, they're honest guys, but they were brain dead on this issue. So I called in and I said, you guys are about to sign the results of this election in a few days. who was the programmer that programmed the computers that told the election computers what to do last night? And neither one of them knew. And one of them asked me, said, well, who is it? And I said, I have no idea who it is, but don't you think that you guys, the heads of the Democrat and Republican Party in Cincinnati who are about to sign these results, don't you think you should know who programmed the computer? Or better yet, throw out the computer. Point is, you get the point? They never even are asking. And the companies won't tell them who programmed these computers. You can't find out who programmed the computers, what the name of the person is. Okay, second anecdote. This is much more serious. I believe it was in October of 2014 at a place called The Farm, I believe. It might have been 2012, and we're about to put this up on YouTube. I should have had it up long ago, and we'll have it accurate on that YouTube. It was at the place called The Farm, which is a wedding hall in Cincinnati. It was a Tea Party meeting, which had a few hundred people there. And somebody connected with the place called me and said, the Ohio Secretary of State, John Husted, is going to be over here tonight. Come and ask him a question about the election thing. And so I came over, and the Tea Party guy gave me a chance to ask the second question, and I complimented John Husted for trying to avoid duplicate voting and that. But then I said, now I have a tough question for you. I said, isn't it true that the 88 counties in Ohio signed contracts with these 3 election companies, and I named them, that they're not allowed to look at the software? It's in the contract that they're not allowed to look at the software of these companies, the source code and so forth. And he could have ridiculed me and said, oh, you sound like a conspiracy theorist, and made the people laugh, but he didn't, and I give him credit for this. John Husted looked at the podium and kind of went, phew, that's a problem. And he said if some people would file suit, maybe we could do something about it. A few of the older gentlemen in the audience afterwards came over and said he basically confirmed that they're not allowed to look at the software. I said, that's right, but it's not just Ohio. It's in the whole United States. So we'll get that up as a YouTube. When I put this version up after this election without the first part, then we'll probably put it right here, that sound track right in the middle of this thing. Okay, so now we have 5 of the gatekeepers: ES&S, Dominion, Hart, the Republican National Committee, and the Democratic National Committee. So who are the final 7 gatekeepers? You might want to hold on to your chair or sit down for this. The final 7 gatekeepers are ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, AP Wire, and a group called National Election Pool. Now 1 in 100,000 Americans probably have heard of, or at least it hasn't registered with them, that there's a important corporation called National Election Pool. It used to be called Voter News Service. This is another example of musical chairs. Same company, basically same people, same function, but Voter News Service, the name got so stinky after the 2000 election that in 2003 they changed their name, still headquartered in New York City, still owned by the same corporations, which we're about to tell you. They changed their name from Voter News Service to National Election Pool. Who owns National Election Pool? It is jointly owned by ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, and AP Wire. Let's repeat that because it might be a shocker. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, AP Wire own National Election Pool, formerly Voter News Service. All announcements are made to the public by the 5 big TV networks and AP on election night. The local papers and radio stations get theirs from one of these sources after they get the word from National Election Pool, a company they jointly own, a private company they jointly own. All big media websites on the national and gubernatorial election announcements are controlled by NEP. When National Election Pool, when NEP changes something on their website, it changes on all websites. Important side note, any competition between the 5 big TV networks on projecting winners and losers has been a total fake and a deliberate deception on part of the 5 big TV networks going back to the 60s. The 5 big TV networks get the exact same information at the exact same time from the exact same source, namely the company they jointly own with AP Wire, the National Election Pool. The so-called exit polls and entrance polls. entrance polls such as at the Iowa caucus are done by National Election Pool. By the way, you can look up on Wikipedia or on their own website to confirm what I'm saying is true about who owns them. And then the results are passed on to the 5 owners, the 5 big TV networks and AP simultaneously, and yet the big TV networks have maintained that we're projecting the winner first and all this baloney when they're actually getting the exact same information from the exact same company that they jointly own. The purpose of the highly questionable voter VNS, NEP, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox exit polls, debunked completely, in my opinion, in 2 chapters in Vote Scam, The Stealing of America by the late Collier brothers, is to prepare the TV viewer for the unverifiable computer count, which will be announced in the next few hours or even within the next few minutes later in the evening. We will define what we mean by unverifiable later in this presentation. We caught up with 2 exit polls over the years, and they are very, very hard to find. Why? Because there are very few of them. How does very, very few exit polls in a nation of 200,000 or so precincts provide any kind of a scientific basis to project winners and losers in congressional, senatorial, and presidential races? By the way, you have to find these exit polls hit and miss because the networks will not publish in advance where they are. One exit poll we caught up with was being conducted during the 1996 New Hampshire presidential primary on February 20th, 1996, at a school in Manchester, New Hampshire. The lady that was hired by Voter News Service, now it's National Election Poll, told us that they arrive at 9 a.m. missing the morning rush from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Then only about 1 out of 15 people will talk to them. Why? Because people are in a hurry. Maybe they don't want to talk about their vote. Maybe they got to pick up their mom for the doctor's appointments or get their kids to preschool or whatever. They're in a hurry. So only 1 out of 15 will talk to them. Then they have to be somewhere. They pick up, for whatever the people do, as we said. And then the Voter News Service exit pollers at that time call in their results to VNS in New York City at about 5 p.m., meaning they missed the evening rush from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. We filmed the VMS lady up in New Hampshire calling in her results on a payphone in the school lobby while hundreds of people were walking past her on their way to vote in the school gym between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. So they missed the morning rush, they missed the evening rush. Only 1 out of 15 people will talk to them while they're there. Where's the scientific basis of these exit polls? By the way, in the tab Election Night Gatekeepers, on openlettertodonaldtrump.com, we publish a picture of the box that the lady in 1986 was using, the Voter News Service box, and it has all the logos of all the networks in AP Wire on the box, which you can click on and see. In the 1992 New Hampshire primary, the exit poll showed Buchanan in a dead heat with President Bush the Elder. As the evening started, it was 49-49 between Bush the Elder and Pat Buchanan. Then, and I was watching very closely because I was backing Buchanan, Buchanan, like Ron Paul, like Trump, are not. The power brokers are afraid of him because they're their own man. Same would go for Ralph Nader, Dennis Kucinich to some extent, certainly the late Jim Traficant, the congressman from Youngstown, Ohio. But Buchanan was feared by the power brokers, and this was in editorials in CFR magazine and so forth, the Council on Foreign Relations. Then Buchanan, every 3 hours, it was 49-49, every 3 hours Buchanan would drop 3% throughout the night. So while Bush stayed at 49% all night, a virtual statistical impossibility, by morning, the published results were 49 for Bush the Elder and 37 for Buchanan. They wanted to get Buchanan under that 40%, which would really look bad for Bush, even though Buchanan probably beat him, if the truth be known. This was clear manipulation by the crooks running the New Hampshire election system, both in the computerized half of New Hampshire and in the hand-counted half, but no one was watching. We weren't up there. No one was watching. Now we're about 80% computerized in New Hampshire and 20% of the votes hand-counted. And this was to save face for President Bush the Elder. When Warren Matofsky of then Voter News Service was asked how come his exit polls were so far off, he replied to Time magazine, paraphrase, quote, because the Buchanan supporters were so much more willing to talk to us, unquote. Well then, Mr. Matovsky, where's the scientific basis of your exit polls if you're dependent on which candidates have more, passionate support and are more willing to talk to you? Where's the scientific basis? A lot of the polls, especially when there were just a few polls, there's a lot more polls now, giving the power brokers a hot potato because so many places are taking polls. So when they just had a few polls, those polls were preparing people for the exit polls, was preparing people for the rigged computer count. There was no scientific basis for these exit polls. The second exit poll we caught up was in Boone County, Kentucky in 1996 on the day of the November presidential election. Someone called my office in Cincinnati about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and I rushed over across the river to Kentucky about half hour down to the location as fast as I could after finishing up what I was doing at my business that day. With rush hour traffic, I got there about 5:20 with a 7:30 p.m. poll closing time, I believe. It was 7 or 7:30. True to what the VNS exit poll lady in New Hampshire had told us, the exit pollers had already left at 5:20. There were hundreds of people standing in line waiting to vote because they were getting off work. How does missing the rush hour periods of Election Day, with only 1 out of 15 voters willing to talk to the exit pollers in the intervening hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., provide any kind of a scientific basis to project winners and losers, especially in close races? These are like little spy operations for the big networks on what people are really thinking, but they publish what they want, and there's no checks and balances, needless to say, on these exit polls. Okay, Section 4, I want to give a few examples here. This brings us to one of the most absurd projections in the history of the computerized election era, which goes from 1973 till now in 2016, when this is being made. The 5 TV networks projected Al Gore to win Florida at about 9:40 p.m. on November election night in the year 2000. Which was the beginning of the infamous Bush-Gore contest, which lasted 35 days. It turned out that there were only 39 exit polls being conducted by then Voter News Service for the 5 TV networks and AP. Only 39 exit polls in Florida, which had 7,000 precincts. Think of that. Only 39 exit polls, 7,000 precincts. And this was a race that was so close that they couldn't determine the outcome for 35 days. Yet at 9:45, all the networks projected Al Gore to win. I was in a little restaurant bar for a person I knew that was running for state rep to be at her party, and it was jam-packed. And when I looked up at 9:45 and saw them projecting Gore, I said, boy, how can this be? Because all the pre-conditioning of the networks was that Bush was going to win. Well, I stayed up that night and kept watching. About 2 a.m., they all started to reverse themselves. But my point is, if it was like 80% for Gore and 20% for Bush, maybe 39 magic exit polls could have projected it. But how did they project? Why did they project it when it was so close that they couldn't sort it out for 35 days? The answer is that part of that whole thing was to lead to the HAVA, Help America Vote Act, which got in these the most horrible, easily rigged computer systems, even more easily rigged than they were before 2000. They wanted to take away the chance of getting caught when they're rigging these elections, so they got in all these systems now that are accessible by cell phone and satellite technology without the local people in each county even knowing that they're being accessed by these big corporations we're talking about. So anyway, that was one of the most absurd projections ever because it was so close and they only had 39. And none of the books about the 2000 election ever give you any of the punchline like we're giving you here. They never got close to telling you what we're telling you in this tape. Another example, Senator Bob Smith, who was a real good constitutional senator from New Hampshire. He was running for re-election in New Hampshire in 1996. And in a way, this story says it all. So Senator Smith, later talking about how all the TV networks called him the loser in 1996 in the New Hampshire Senate race, only to be proven wrong when the hand-counted ballots came in from around the state. He told C-SPAN later that year, "They forgot that in New Hampshire we count the votes before we declare the winner," unquote. That's what he told a C-SPAN interviewer with a smile. Well, he didn't know how right he was. In 1996, there were 33 races for Senate in 33 states, because each year you have about 1/3 of the states, elect their senators, because we got 100 senators, so each year 1/3. So in 1996, there were 33 Senate races. At that time, Fox was only a few months old, so they were not yet involved as an owner of Voter News Service. It was ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. All these networks, all four of them, projected correctly, quote unquote, the quote winner unquote, in 32 of the 33 states. Those were the 32 states that were totally counted by the secret, easily rigged computer programs. So the computer rigging could make their projections come true. They were right in 32 out of 32 states. Now, the last state, they all projected, all four networks projected that Bob Smith's opponent won the race, a Democrat named Richard Sweat. They all projected it. And guess what? They didn't rig it enough for Richard Sweat, the Democrat. And as the hand counts came in from around the state, and I believe half the votes were hand counted then, as they trickled in from around the state, Bob Smith pulled ahead and won the race. Smith said it was like going to hell and then being told you're going to heaven. But the point here is the lessons are obvious here. It strongly indicates that in reality that all of the big TV networks were getting their numbers from the one source, which they were, Voter News Service, and they all projected the winner in lockstep. And secondly, they were 100% correct, where the easily rigged secret computer programs could make the projections come true. That's why they made projections. But in the one state that there was half hand counted at that time, now it's down to 20% hand counted in New Hampshire, at the neighborhood precincts, all the big TV networks could not project the winner. They projected the false winner in lockstep, and they were all proven wrong when the hand counts came in. That's why we got to get rid of all computers, count those votes by hand with pre-selected neighbors who are paid well for 4 hours work, so everybody will want the job, and every faction, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, Constitution Party, can stand around at close range and watch the count. And we could make it even better than that with cameras on the ceiling, and people could watch it on the internet and everything, but that's another story. So the computers used in the Manchester and the other big cities in New Hampshire were programmed against the patriotic Senator Bob Smith, but the vote scam syndicate miscalculated, did not steal enough votes from Smith in the large cities, and as the hand-counted votes from the outlying areas of New Hampshire came in, then Smith actually won. This one story tells it all if you really think about it. So let's talk about what happens on election night, what's going to happen on 2016 on Super Tuesday on March 1st. We're now on February 9th today, and what's going to happen in South Carolina. What actually happens? So I'm going to use an example, 2008 and 2012, but it's the same that's going to happen tonight. Let's take John McCain in 2008 and Mitt Romney in 2012, who had no visible support. In many ways, people said, the commentators were saying they could hardly find anybody where Romney was their first choice. So what happens is, A, the three mega companies, at that time it was 4, ES&S, Diebold, Hart, and Sequoia, had long ago been hired by the brain-dead and or traitorous county boards of election in those states, mostly brain-dead, people that are listening to their party bosses and need the job or just don't care and want to climb the ladder. The primary states on that Super Tuesday, let's say in 2012, were Georgia, Ohio, Massachusetts, Vermont, Virginia, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. These boards of election had signed contracts which stated that they were not allowed to inspect in any way the source code of the software which were telling the computers what to do on that election night. Same will happen in the 2016 in 80% of New Hampshire, all of South Carolina, and all those Super Tuesday primary states. Of course, the caucus states you can watch if the campaigns are shall we say, sharp enough to do so. B, or if we could find enough people, which is hard without the cooperation of the campaigns. In those states, citizens, candidates, and local press people, the Super Tuesday computerized primary states, the state citizens, candidates, and local press people are illegally prevented from getting at any ballots in any effective way on election night. They cannot effectively count the ballots. In a place like Ohio, the ballots disappear. You never see them again unless there's a recount. And then that's 21 days later, plenty of time to switch the ballots. So after a few hours, ES&S, Diebold, Hart, and Sequoia tell National Election Pool the company that is jointly owned by the networks, what the results are. Tonight it'll be ES&S, Hart, and Dominion. It'll tell National Election Pool, that mysterious corporation in New York City owned by the 5 TV networks. Then National Election Pool passes on the results to the 5 big TV networks and AP Wire. Now, somebody's told me there's now a company between the 3 computer companies and National Election Pool. This is trivia. The 5 TV networks are the power. They're the ones that announce it. So whether there is a company between them is really trivia. How many corporations they put in the middle to fool us is not important. National Election Pool that basically then informs the networks, and the networks announce the results to the public. They announced the 5 big TV networks, and AP Wire announces the results to the public, and the big radio stations, the big newspaper dailies, parrot what they hear from AP, and of course the big TV networks, they announce what they're told. The public in the United States of America take these public results on blind faith. This was the conclusion that computer expert Robert Strunk wrote in his expert testimony to the court in 1985 in Cincinnati and Hamilton County, to the court of Judge Richard Niehaus, who made a tremendous ruling, which was overruled by the Supreme Court. And this case was called Schutzman versus the Hamilton County Board of Elections, and Dr. Robert Strunk concluded that taking the election results run by the computers then in Cincinnati, and of course it would apply to all across the country, was an act of blind faith. Another leading expert on computerized elections in the United States, Dr. David Dill, has given this quote, which is in the article How They Could Steal the Election This Time, which is in the 2004 article by Ronnie Duggar in The Nation, linked on our votefraud.org site on the homepage in the right-hand column. Here's what Dr. David Dill of Stanford University said. Why am I always being asked to prove these systems aren't secure? The burden of proof ought to be on the vendor, namely ES&S. The vendors, again, would be ES&S, Hart, and Dominion now. The burden of proof, going back to the quote from Dr. David Dill, the burden of proof ought to be on the vendor. You ask about the hardware, secret. The software, secret. What's the cryptography? Can't tell you because they'll compromise the secrecy of the machines. Federal testing procedures, secret. Results of the test, secret. Basically, we are required to have blind faith, end quote, from Dr. David Dill of Stanford University. Okay, so backing up to before Super Tuesday 2008 and 2012, the 5 TV networks created the narrative that McCain in 2008 and Romney in 2012 were either going to win or were surging on Super Tuesday. 2008, McCain had no visible support before New Hampshire, except the big media claim that he was surging. He could not get crowds. When he came to Cincinnati, Ohio, the Republican Party, even after he got the nomination, had to empty out their employees at the courthouse to manufacture a crowd. On Meet the Press, one of the court commentators, using that medieval term of court jesters and court people, a lady stated that McCain was at war with the party's base, an absurd statement on its face, as the base does the voting. And even now the press is talking about the establishment. The establishment only accounts for a few thousand people. They could only have establishment candidates that the people don't want if they were fixing the easily rigged, secret, computerized election counts. What the media, Meet the Press panel member lady, whose name escapes me, unintentionally hinted at was that the base does the vote. Hinted at was that the base does the voting, but the establishment old guard behind both parties does the counting through these mega corporations, the election night gatekeepers, and the secret, easily rigged computers. As we have on all of our websites, what communist dictator Joseph Stalin said, those who cast the votes decide nothing, those who count the votes decide everything. In 2012, reporters repeatedly said that it was hard to find anyone whose first choice was Romney. But Romney won handily in the computer quote-unquote counted states of the primary states on Super Tuesday. This goes back to 1988. The people, the insurgent candidates that were doing well against Bush in 88, which was Pat Robertson, Buchanan in 96, and Ron Paul in 2012 and 2016, would always get wiped out in the easily rigged, secret, computerized election counts on Super Tuesday. So that is what is probably, they're either going to do that this time in 2016 against Trump, or they're going to make it so mixed up that they have a brokered convention, which they've been talking about now ever since they were afraid they couldn't make a total Trump blowout believable. So citizens in any state outside of the 10 small counties in New Hampshire, which count the votes in the open at closing time, will find, in the computer counted areas, will find they are arrested if they push too hard to count the ballots on election night in the computerized states in the computerized part of New Hampshire. Same goes for all the 3,142 counties across the United States. There's no way, and this is why we're in a round loop until we get rid of the computers and count the votes by hand with the citizens in each neighborhood precinct, and then check to make the counties and the national counts add those up right, because a lot of times the powers that be just fix the counts at the state or national level and nobody's checking them. That's how we got forced the Iowa GOP to change the winner from Romney to Santorum in 2012 in the GOP Iowa caucus, because we were watching how they added them up at the state level. Thankfully, Edward True came forth out of Apponeuse County and proved that they had added 20 votes to Romney's in his state. That's how we did it. You got to watch what they're doing at the state level, because they're a bunch of crooks in all 50 states. I'm not just picking on Iowa. The Iowa Republican Party elections. So then, so that's what's happening. The local people, again, are totally abdicating the responsibility for the one thing they are commissioned to do: run honest, transparent elections where the published results reflect how the people voted, not how the old guard shadow government running the election computers want them to vote. These counties are violating their own state laws. They're violating the Declaration of Independence, the consent of the governed, the U.S. Constitution, and 3 still standing U.S. Supreme Court decisions, namely U.S. versus Mosley, 1915, Reynolds versus Sims, 1964, and Westbury versus Sanders, 1964. You can find those listed in Election Night Gatekeepers tab at openlettertodonaldtrump.com. You can also find it in the YouTube video put up in 2008, South Carolina Super Tuesday and Ron Paul. That's South Carolina Super Tuesday and Ron Paul 10-minute YouTube video. Westbury versus Sanders says, paraphrase, if all other rights are vitiated or spoiled, all other rights are nullified if the right to vote is not safeguarded. Obviously the case. You don't have to be a computer expert or understand computers at all to grasp what is happening here. When someone or anyone wants to count your votes in secret, you've got a problem, and I've got a problem. And the combination of the RNC, the DNC, ES&S, Hart Dominion, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, AP Wire, and National Election Poll have succeeded in setting up a system where they do count our votes in secret. And to add insult to injury, the 5 big TV networks and AP and all the big media, New York Times, are hiding what is happening in these U.S. elections from the American public. I may have skipped some of the sections announcing them, but this is section 6, short. It's the toddler in the car seat, the greatest analogy ever made. Victoria Collier, the daughter of the late vote scam author Jim Collier, has said, "You can't vote the bums out because you didn't vote the bums in." Let's repeat that. You can't vote the bums out because you didn't vote the bums in. That's the point. Since at least as far back as 1988, the vote scam syndicate, these 12 corporations we've covered, have quietly imposed a sinister election fraud system on the American people, with the news media protecting them. And let me tell you, not the national media, no local media connected with those big networks is allowed to report on this. You've never heard it. If reporter does accidentally report on it, they're taken off the story quickly, and they can either decide to keep pushing and lose their job or get transferred to the sports department, or then they can just quit doing it. Lou Dobbs did his best on CNN. He was covering that and some other things, and they were going to fire him. He quit first. Now he's been put in Fox Business Network, and where he occasionally can get in a lick, but not much because he's all in business. The American people are like, now here's the analogy from a fellow named Chuck Geschleiter out of New York City, and this is the greatest analogy for what's happening in the American election system. and this shows that right now the people have no effective way in any national elections to get a fair count if the big networks can make a scenario believable. Why? Because all these elections are counted in secret by these three big mega corporations, at least the essential vast majority of it is. With one of them, Election System and Services, again counting 60% of the American vote. And that's from the article by Ronnie Duggar in The Nation. How they could steal the election this time. Here's the analogy from Chuck Geschleiter. He said this at our vote fraud convention, our Citizens for a Fair Vote Count convention in 2000 at this Radisson at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. He said the American people are like a little 3-year-old toddler in a car seat with a steering wheel, and the kid is having a good time while his parents driving, and he's turning the wheel, and so at election time, the parent in this case would be these 12 election night gatekeepers, and the little kid is turning the little plastic wheel and laughing and having a good time as the parent drives the car, and the parent looks over and says, "Good boy, Johnny, you're such a big boy driving this car." The American people are told that by the 5 big TV networks. They always tell us, "You're the freest people ever." In fact, the parent is the only one driving the car. The little toddler has nothing to do with what's happening in the elections, but he thinks he's steering the car. So in this analogy, the parent are the wire pullers behind the international banks like the Fed, Federal Reserve Board, Goldman Sachs, etc., and the Bank of Settlements, etc. This is like a follow the money thing. The parent has the motive to keep moving more and more money to the top 1% and to grasp more power, inching closer and closer as to what they hope will be a world government, although they're nowhere near that. This is not free enterprise, what they're working for. It's vulture capitalism, which ends up in the same place as socialism, communism. This is the motive. And with socialism, communism, or vulture capitalism, with all the unnecessary centralized planning and needless regimentation of mankind these two systems entail. So Section 7, this is the motive, and this is a brain twister for people. The top socialists and communists have always been the billionaire banksters behind such companies as Goldman Sachs and the International Monetary Fund. And the Federal Reserve Board. They want communism for you and me, but billionaire ruler status for themselves and their associates, comrades, whatever. Communism, socialism are the masks these banksters have worn while they are in the process of subduing a society. Communism. Commune. The banksters want 99% of the people on a large commune living like animals, owning nothing, and being in needless debt from birth until death while these banksters run the world. That's what communism means. This is the motive for computerized voting. It's money and it's power, especially power once they become billionaires. And it is virtually impossible for most people to believe that there are sociopathic millionaires and billionaires who want to subdue mankind and rule the world. For a responsible introduction to this subject on YouTube, see The Secret of Oz, which is about 90 minutes, and The Money Masters, which is about 3.5 hours, by Bill Still, who's an excellent reporter. Section 8, New Hampshire 2016. So as we're finishing this, doing this tape on February 9th, 2016, right few hours before the New Hampshire primary voting ends, anyone watching can see that the GOP establishment and the big media on all channels are brazenly campaigning for 5 days up until Saturday for Marco Rubio. It was the biggest push for one candidate I ever saw. Then the debate happened, and they figured, well, Rubio got so beat up, they now went into, well, we got all these people who are going to be important, they're going to stay in, and they're now kind of preparing people for a brokered convention. If the campaigns are sharp enough, or if we get how many ever people up there watching, you watch the hand count precincts in New Hampshire, which is 120 or 130 of them, and you compare it against the 260 unknowable, secret, easily rigged computer count election polling places. But then we get to South Carolina on February 20th. There's no ballots. It's so absurd you can't believe it, and we're hoping Donald Trump comes out and says, we object to this no ballot election. We want at every election to be paper ballots counted in the open at each neighborhood precinct. That would set the whole world on fire, the whole country on fire, and people would finally realize why the country keeps going downhill and why all these candidates that get the big support visibly, such as Buchanan versus Dole or Ron Paul versus Romney in 2012, or Donald Trump versus everybody else now, why we end up getting a Bush or a Clinton or some nondescript person who does the will of the background financial forces. Okay, so one might ask then, can't the citizens look at the ballots on election day? Isn't there any double check? Of course, as I said, the answer is no. Any citizen or candidate or local press person who tries to get at the ballots will be illegally arrested by the local police, who have been tricked into protecting the vote scammers instead of the people and the integrity of the election. Can't the citizens set up a process in advance with the local board of elections to count the actual ballots on election day in the computerized areas? Answer, no. Unless you live in those 10 small counties in New Hampshire, which still count the votes constitutionally, then you cannot. Call your local board of elections or your Secretary of State and try it. You can prove what I'm saying by calling them if you live anywhere outside New Hampshire or even in those 10 counties in New Hampshire. Remember, once the ballots leave the public site and the public control to be processed through the computer system, the chain of custody, the chain of evidence is broken. Legally speaking, it's broken. The vote scam syndicate, these 12 mega gatekeepers on election night, has the United States in the position where no one can prove who should be in the elected offices of Congress, U.S. Senator, or President. We can make a good guess in many cases where the election wasn't close, but we cannot prove it in a courtroom type sense because the ballots were taken from the people before they were counted in public. No checks and balances on election day or in any of the primaries. Secret counts are the problem. Secret computer counts are a criminal activity by 3,100 of the 3,132 of the 3,142 counties in the United States. The only reason the county boards of elections exist is to hold transparent, honest elections. So what the people vote in the neighborhood polling places is what the Board of Elections publish at the end of the election night. By allowing $3 billion mega companies to conduct elections on secret computer programs for 99% of this country, the local counties and the Secretary of States are totally abdicating their constitutionally mandated responsibilities. They are signing results when they don't know if the results are true or false, subversive, treasonous, aiding and abetting a foreign enemy, namely the international bank corporations around the Fed and Goldman Sachs, which now constitute an enemy without borders, an enemy of the United States and all other countries, which, almost all other countries anyway, which are without borders but still have more power than almost all of these countries. Section 9, just to emphasize the last point, which I already have, John Husted confirmed in a public gathering in Cincinnati at a Tea Party meeting that all these counties in Ohio and it's across the country sign a contract that they're not allowed to see this. They agree not to look at the source code. So here's what should happen as we start to move to a close. Ballots must be counted right at closing time by neighborhood citizens. This is Section 10. Before the ballots leave the site of the polling place judges and the local neighborhood people. This is the only way to ensure a fair count as far as humanly possible. And the 5 big TV networks and the old guard establishment between the RNC and the DNC will fight this with everything they've got. When Trump challenged the Iowa caucus even, they said, oh, he's got to get back on message. No, stay on the challenging these elections. The Founding Fathers would say be skeptical, trust but verify, but we have to double check these elections. Once the vote is restored to the people, instead of those controlling the election night gatekeepers, it's the end of puppet congressmen, puppet senators, and puppet presidents. It's the beginning of the end for the international banksters' long-running attempt to destroy free enterprise as the Founding Fathers envisioned it with either vulture capitalism or communism and socialism. And it's the beginning of an honest national monetary office that will issue money scientifically at no interest to the nation in order to serve the people, the only purpose for which money-issuing entities like the Fed exist, Fed being a private company hired by Congress in 1913. As one perspicacious high school teacher told her high school class in Texas a generation ago, and I know this from one of my friends down there, she said, quote, and he never forgot it, "The duty of the Treasury is to issue currency and credit in sufficient supply to meet the needs of commerce and industry." The reason we have such a problem in the United States is there's a cash shortage. There's not enough cash in the hands of the middle class and the lower class to buy the goods and services which are easily available in 2016. Finally, one of the friends of Watch the Vote, USA.com, Doug Bersall, he ran the elections in Richmond, New Hampshire until 2012, and they still do it right there. And we got to do an interview with him on exactly how they did it, because what he did and supervised in Richmond, New Hampshire, is what should be done in every polling place in the United States. It would cost us about $500 million per primary season and another $500 million for the general election. But this is a small price to pay to make sure we get the right leaders in office. We spent $48 billion in the first 12 months in the Iraq War in 2003, 2004. So it would take us about 50 or 60 years to spend that much money to do honest elections count at the primary season and then at the November election. And so what if someone demands a recount, which rarely happens, of the published results? Now they have to wait a long time, like 21 days, as well as specify what precincts they wish to recount. I'm sorry, but if my cabal are stealing the city, the county, the state, and the world, 21 days is plenty of time to switch the ballots to make the election night published results come true. Also, there are high-tech printing machines that can manufacture hundreds of ballots an hour, maybe thousands, so that the original ones can be replaced before the precincts are brought out to the public for the recount. In the documentary Hacking Democracy, featuring Bev Harris from blackboxvoting.org, that's a HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, that documentary spotlights this were the ballots switched issue near the end of the documentary, in the segment dealing with the recount in Cleveland, Ohio, after the 2004 Bush-Kerry presidential election. The answer is simple: ban all computers and machines from the voting process, have pre-selected neighborhood citizens by a reasonable process selected in an open and fair process a few weeks before Election Day, count the paper ballots at each neighborhood polling place in public right as the polls close, before the ballots leave the sight of the election judges or the public. Everyone is allowed to watch the count at close range as long as they don't interfere with the count. The results are posted on the wall of the polling place for 3 days after the election for all to come and check, and each candidate should double check that the County Board of Elections adds up what all the polling places do so that they're added up properly. It does not do any good to get a receipt. You know how you voted. We need to know how the 10,000 people in your city or the 10 million people in your state voted, or how the country voted. The receipt, it does nothing. It does not do anything to have a paper ballot for later recount, because once the paper ballots leave the public site, they can be switched with all kinds of high-tech technology. We need the paper ballots not to leave the public site and counted right there at the neighborhood citizens to take back our destiny. So I say, well, the old guard will scream that this is impossible. It certainly is not. It would take about 12 citizens on average at each polling place nationwide to do the counting in the 200,000 precincts. These counters used to be called scrutineers. 2 each would take 50 ballots at the average county. Of course, you'd have more at some of the big places in New York City and L.A., and maybe less in some of the rural counties, but that's an average. And we've already said it's very affordable, $500 million per primary season, $500 million per November election, a fraction of even our foreign aid bill to the Middle East, to all the countries over in the Middle East. The longer we have computerized elections, the more domestic enemies will be occupying the offices, puppets of the international bankers, and the more we will have unnecessary economic hard times in this age of plenty. While computers are great for many things, I'm using one right now, they are horrible and unacceptable for elections because no one can see what's happening inside a computer. The man who invented, some people say, the first desktop computer Adam Osborne wrote in his 1979 book, Running Wild, The Next Industrial Revolution, Running Wild is the name of the book, that computers should never be used to count elections. So whatever it takes, whatever the cost, we must restore transparent, honest, hand-counted elections to every polling place in the United States of America. The hand count must be conducted in each neighborhood polling place right as the polling place closes and before the ballots leave the public site. Millions of Americans have fought and bled and died so that at least they thought they were fighting and bleeding and dying for this, even though in some wars it wasn't the case. They have fought and bled and died to try and ensure our right to determine our nation's destiny at the ballot box. We dare not let a group of 12 election night gatekeepers spit on their sacrifice. The end. This is Jim Condit Jr., founder of Watch the Vote USA. Thank you very much for listening.